In the dusty frontier town of Copper Ridge, everyone walked past her as if she wasn't there. An elderly woman, confused and lost outside the trading post, clutching a worn leather bag while people hurried by without a glance. But when 19-year-old Jake Thornfield, a broke ranch hand with nothing but the clothes on his back and his father's old horse, stopped to help her find her way home, he had no idea he was about to uncover the valley's biggest secret. What happened next would change his life forever. This wasn't just any lost elderly woman. She was Martha Whitmore, owner of half the land visible for miles around. But first, Jake would have to risk losing the only roof over his head, ride through dangerous mountain passes in the dead of night, and make a choice that cost him everything he had. This is the story of how one simple act of kindness in the Wild West led to the most unexpected twist imaginable. And why the people who appear to have the least are often the ones most willing to give. The autumn sun hung low over Copper Ridge that evening, casting long shadows between the weathered buildings lining the main street. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and dust, mingled with the distant lowing of cattle in the valley below. It was the sort of evening that hinted at winter's approach, when sensible folk hurried to finish their errands before the mountain cold set in. Jake Thornfield guided his father's old horse, Dusty, down the rutted main street. His worn saddlebags were heavy with the day's final delivery. At 19, Jake carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned early that life rarely offered handouts. His clothes were patched but clean, his boots scuffed from years of hard labor, and his hat, the only item of real value he owned, had belonged to his father before lunging sickness claimed him 2 winters earlier. Since then, Jake had scraped by as a ranch hand at the Broken Spur, taking whatever jobs were available, mending fences, herding cattle, breaking horses others wouldn't touch. The pay barely kept him fed and sheltered, but it was honest work, and Jake had learned to be grateful for what little he had. That evening, as usual, he'd taken on extra deliveries from Jameson's trading post to outlying homesteads. Old Pete Jameson paid him 50 cents each, and every coin counted. Tonight's final run would give Jake just enough for his weekly bunk fee at the Broken Spur. Without it, he'd be sleeping rough, and with winter coming, that could prove fatal in these mountains. He had one last stop, a bag of medicine and supplies for Widow Henderson, whose cabin lay a good hour's ride up the mountain trail. If he reached her place and returned before full dark, he'd have his rent money and a roof for another week. Jake was tying Dusty to the hitching post outside Jameson's when he noticed her. On the covered porch, usually empty at this hour, sat a lone figure on the wooden bench. An elderly woman in a faded blue dress and tattered shawl, silver hair escaping a once neat bun. She clutched a worn leather bag and kept scanning the street as though waiting for someone long overdue. Jake had seen her there when he'd collected the delivery earlier. People had walked past all afternoon. Ranchers heading home, shopkeepers closing up, families finishing errands, but no one had stopped. In a town where everyone knew everyone, that struck Jake as odd. The woman's weathered hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her shawl against the chill. Her eyes, clouded with age and confusion, searched the empty street with quiet desperation that tugged at Jake's chest. He'd seen that look before, in his father's eyes during his final weeks. Jake checked his pocket watch. A dented brass piece from his grandfather. 6:30, if he left now, he could still make the Henderson place in time. His rent, his bed, his immediate future all depended on it. But something about the woman's stillness held him back. Against his better judgment, Jake stepped down from Dusty and approached the porch. His spurs clinked softly on the wooden steps as he removed his hat. "Evening, ma'am," he said gently. "Are you waiting for someone?" She looked up, studying his face as if trying to place him. Then she offered a small, uncertain smile. "I think so. Or perhaps they're waiting for me. I'm not entirely sure anymore." She glanced at her bag, then back at the street. "I was meant to meet someone about transport home. The details keep slipping away." Jake knelt to her eye level. Up close, he noticed the fine quality of her dress beneath the dust, better fabric than most in Copper Ridge could afford. Her hands showed no signs of lifelong hard labor. Something didn't fit. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Martha," she replied, then paused. "Martha Whitmore, I believe." "Yes, that sounds right." She touched her throat absently, where a delicate silver locket hung. "I live up in the canyon somewhere, Eagles Canyon, I think." Jake's breath caught. Eagles Canyon was a 3-hour ride away, through treacherous passes dangerous even by day. For an elderly woman alone at night, it would be near impossible. "Ma'am, Eagles Canyon is quite far," he said carefully. "How did you get to town today?" "I remember a wagon, perhaps." There was a young man, my ranch hand. He was supposed to wait, but she looked around again. Maybe he forgot. Or maybe I did. Jake's heart sank. She was clearly confused, perhaps from age or illness, but harmless, just lost and frightened. Leaving her here as night fell and temperatures dropped would be dangerous. Mountain lions had been spotted recently. "Is there anyone in town who might know you?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't come down often anymore. I used to, when my husband was alive, but that was long ago." Jake glanced at Dusty, then at the darkening sky. The sensible choice was to ride on. Someone else, the sheriff, perhaps, would sort it out. But as he looked at Martha, he saw his late grandmother in her features, someone who had also grown confused toward the end and died alone because everyone was too busy. "Mrs. Whitmore," he heard himself say, "would you like me to take you home?" Her face brightened with relief. "Oh, would you? That's very kind. But it's far, and getting dark. I wouldn't want to put you out." Jake checked his watch again, 6:45. He could still make the Henderson delivery if he left now. Mrs. Henderson needed her medicine, Jake needed the money. Winter jobs would dry up soon. One missed payment could mean weeks sleeping rough. Yet he couldn't walk away. If his own grandmother had been lost in a strange town, he'd have wanted someone to help her, cost be damned. "Don't worry about putting me out, Mrs. Whitmore. I'd be glad to see you home safe." He helped her to her feet, she felt frail beneath the worn fabric, and led her to Dusty. "It'll be a long ride, ma'am, especially riding double. The trails aren't easy. You sure you're up for it?" Martha settled behind him with surprising ease. "Young man, I've been riding these mountains since before you were born. I may forget some things these days, but I still know how to sit a horse." As they rode out of Copper Ridge, Jake caught Pete Jameson locking up. Pete raised a hand, Jake touched his hat brim in reply. By morning, Pete would know the delivery had been missed. The trail climbed steeply. Dusty's breathing grew labored under the double weight. Behind him, Martha gave occasional quiet directions, left at the lightning-struck pine, shortcut through the rock gap. Despite her earlier confusion, she knew these trails by heart. After an hour, she spoke again. "I used to ride this trail twice a week when I was younger, down for supplies, social visits. My husband always said I was too independent, riding alone." She chuckled softly. "He was probably right, but I couldn't stand being cooped up." "How long have you lived in Eagles Canyon?" Jake asked, partly to keep her talking. "Let me think. Thomas and I built the main house in 1855, just after we married. Started with nothing but a claim and a dream. Thomas had vision, said this valley would be worth a fortune one day. He was always planning ahead, especially about water rights. Bought up everything around Willow Creek before others realized its value. Whoever controls the water controls the valley, he used to say. Jake felt a chill. Willow Creek fed half the ranches below, including the Broken Spur. If the Whitmores owned those rights, they were among the wealthiest in the territory, hardly the sort to leave an elderly widow wandering alone. They crested another ridge, lights twinkled ahead, not scattered homestead glows, but the windows of a substantial house. "Almost home," Martha said with satisfaction. "Samuel will be worried." As they neared, Jake saw the full extent, a grand two-story house with wings, barns, bunkhouses, corrals stretching into the dark. Gas lamps lined a cobblestone courtyard, gardens visible even at night. This was no ordinary ranch, it was an empire. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jake asked carefully, "how much land do you own?" "Oh, about half the valley these days, perhaps more. Thomas kept adding to it, and I continued after he passed. The lawyer handles most details now." Too much for an old woman to track. Before Jake could absorb that, the front door burst open. A tall man in his 50s rushed out, followed by ranch hands with lanterns. "Miss Martha." Thank goodness you're safe. We've had men searching every trail. Oh, Samuel, don't fuss, Martha said fondly as the foreman, Samuel Davies, helped her down. This kind young man brought me home. Davies turned to Jake, extending a hand. Samuel Davies, foreman. Can't thank you enough. Jake Thornfield. Glad to help. Martha insisted Jake stay for supper in the night, but he declined. I need to get back to town. Davies shook his head. Son, it's past 9 and pitch black. Those trails are deadly at night. You'd be risking your neck. But Jake mounted up. He hoped to reach Pete before bed, explain, maybe salvage something. Martha touched his stirrup. You're a good man, Jake Thornfield. I won't forget this. The ride back was harrowing. Starlight only, Dusty picking his way over loose rock and sheer drops. Jake reached Copper Ridge past midnight, town silent. At the Broken Spur bunkhouse, the door was padlocked. His few belongings sat outside in a canvas sack, a note pinned, missed delivery. No excuses. Find new arrangements. Jake spent the night in Morrison's stable loft, curled in horse blankets. The stable owner let him stay in exchange for mucking stalls. 4 days, Jake survived on odd jobs. Hauling water, splitting wood, loading wagons. Word had spread, no ranch would hire him now. Reputation mattered in a small town. On the 4th morning, a fine black buggy rolled into town, polished wood, brass fittings, matched bays. Samuel Davies stepped down and scanned the street until he spotted Jake. Jake Thornfield, Mrs. Whitmore wants a word. Is she all right? She's fine, thanks to you. But when she heard you'd lost your job, Davies shook his head. She insisted I fetch you. She has a proposition. An hour later, Jake rode beside the buggy back to Eagles Canyon. In daylight, the Whitmore ranch was staggering, vast pastures, prime cattle, fine horses, solid buildings. Davies led him into a sunlit parlor where Martha sat, neatly dressed, eyes sharp. There you are, she said warmly. I owe you an apology, and an explanation. Ma'am, you owe me nothing. That's precisely why you're here. In my 73 years, I've learned true character shows when no one is watching. I wasn't as confused that night as I seemed. I have foggy moments, yes, but I remember every kindness you showed. Jake shifted. I only did what anyone should. But no one else did. I sat there 3 hours while neighbors walked past. You were the only one who stopped. She stood at the window overlooking the valley. Thomas built all this from nothing, but he always said real wealth lay in the people we trust, in recognizing character. I've been thinking about what happens to it all when I'm gone. My children and grandson are gone. Jake felt anticipation and unease. I'm not sure I follow, ma'am. I'm offering you a position, assistant manager. You'll work with Samuel, learn every aspect, cattle, water rights, land management, banking, territorial dealings. A real future. Jake stared. Ma'am, that's incredibly generous, but I've no experience beyond basic ranch work. Experience can be taught. Character cannot. You proved yours that night. She produced plans. There's more. I want to establish the Thornfield-Whitmore Settlement Program, to help young people with potential but no opportunities. Land, capital, training, for those dealt a hard hand yet who still choose to do right. Jake's heart raced. This would help people exactly like I was. Precisely. To honor my grandson's memory by giving others the chances he never had. Over the following months, Jake threw himself into learning. Within 6 months he handled correspondence and negotiations, discovering a knack for fair solutions. The settlement program launched the next spring, granting land, livestock, and equipment to deserving young families and individuals. Jake helped select recipients, seeking the same qualities Martha had seen in him. Years later, after Martha passed peacefully, Jake, now respected throughout the territory, still rode past the old trading post site. He remembered the woman on the bench and the choice that changed everything. 25 years on, Jake, now 44, rode a fine horse through a prosperous Copper Ridge. The railroad had brought growth, just as Thomas Whitmore predicted. He stopped at the Whitmore Community Center. The former Jameson's Trading Post, now headquarters for the settlement program that had helped over 200 families. Inside, manager Sarah Mackenzie reported 3 new applications, including a 17-year-old boy sleeping rough after his father's death. "I'll interview that one myself," Jake said. At 3 o'clock, Tommy Carson appeared, hat in hand, patched clothes, proud but weary posture mirroring Jake's own youth. After hearing Tommy's story, Jake smiled. "How would you feel about learning the cattle business properly, land management, water rights, banking?" "I'd be grateful, sir, but I've no experience beyond hard work. Let me tell you something a wise woman once taught me: experience can be taught, character cannot." He offered room, board, fair wage, and a role helping others. Tommy accepted. Tommy later became an outstanding ranch manager and Jake's successor. Riding home that evening, Jake reflected on how life sometimes came full circle. Wealth wasn't measured in land or cattle, but in lives improved. And every time he passed that old bench, he silently thanked the woman whose need had shown him the value of giving others the chance to become who they were meant to be. In his saddlebag was a letter from the territorial governor inviting him to run for legislature, the same ambition Martha once mentioned for her grandson. Some dreams, Jake thought, were worth waiting for, especially those passed on by someone who believed in you first. The ripples would continue long after he was gone, touching lives in ways he would never know.